There is a moment, a very specific moment, that you might recognize. Someone says something to you, something unfair, something that misrepresents you entirely, and you feel the words forming in your throat. You feel the explanation rising, the context, the history, the full and honest truth of why you did what you did, or said what you said. And then, quietly, almost without deciding to, you let it go. You close your mouth, you look away, you go silent. And the strange thing, the thing nobody around you understands, is that the silence did not feel like defeat. It felt like the only dignified choice available to you. If that moment is familiar, then this is for you. Not because something is wrong with you, not because you are cold or avoidant or incapable of communication, but because somewhere, a long time ago, you learned something that most people never learn at all. You learned that explaining yourself is not always the same thing as being understood. And once you learn that, truly learn it, not as a concept, but as a lived experience in your body, the calculus of conversation changes forever. Let us begin at the beginning, because that is where most of these stories actually live. There is a psychological phenomenon that researchers call parentification. It describes what happens when a child is placed, consciously or not, in the emotional role of an adult before their nervous system is remotely prepared for that weight. It does not require dramatic trauma. It does not require an absent parent or a chaotic household, though it can include those things. Sometimes it is quieter than that. Sometimes it is the child who learns to read the room before they can read a book, the one who notices when the tension in the house shifts before a single word is spoken, the one who becomes fluent, early and expertly, in the unspoken language of other people's needs. These children do not grow up believing they are special for this skill. They grow up believing it is simply what is required of them. They manage emotions, mediate conflicts, absorb anxiety, and offer reassurance, all while their own interior world remains largely unwitnessed. Nobody sits with them and asks how they are feeling. Or if someone does ask, the question carries an implicit weight, a hope that the answer will be fine, because there is simply no room in this household, in this dynamic, for this child to also be struggling. So the child adapts. Of course they adapt. The human nervous system is a profoundly intelligent instrument, and when it cannot change its environment, it changes itself. The adaptation looks like maturity from the outside. The child becomes thoughtful, composed, self-sufficient. Adults praise them for it. Teachers admire their emotional regulation. Family members hold them up as the steady one, the reliable one, the one who never causes problems. But here is what those adults are not seeing. What they are calling maturity is not maturity. It is survival wearing maturity's clothes. The real work happening beneath that composed surface is something far more complex. The child is learning, through repeated trial and deeply personal error, that expressing their inner world does not yield the results they need. They try to explain themselves, and they are not heard. They try to share how they are feeling, and the conversation pivots back to someone else's needs. They reach out, and the reach is either missed or mishandled. And so the nervous system, that intelligent adaptive instrument, begins to route around the vulnerability. It begins to build an internal processing system, a private architecture of reflection and resolution that does not require external input to function. This is not pathology. This is intelligence responding to environment. The polyvagal theory, developed by neuroscientist Stephen Porges, gives us a remarkable framework for understanding what is happening at the physiological level in these moments. Porges describes 3 states of the autonomic nervous system, 3 different modes of being in the world. There is the ventral vagal state, which is the state of social engagement, of safety, of genuine connection. There is the sympathetic state, which is mobilization, fight or flight, the state of threat response. And then there is the dorsal vagal state, which is shutdown, collapse, withdrawal, the place the system goes when neither fighting nor fleeing is an option. Now here is where it becomes interesting, and where the experience of the person who goes silent begins to make a very different kind of sense. For those who grew up in environments where authentic expression was routinely unsafe or simply ineffective, The nervous system begins to code the social environment itself as a potential source of threat, not because other people are inherently dangerous, but because the experience of being misunderstood, dismissed, or emotionally abandoned has happened often enough to register as a pattern. And the nervous system is, above all else, a pattern recognition system. It is always asking, is this safe? And when the answer has historically been uncertain, it learns to protect itself preemptively. Silence, then, is not avoidance. Silence is a sanctuary. It is the nervous system choosing the one environment where it has learned it can actually rest, the interior world, the private space where no explanation is required and no misunderstanding is possible, because no one else is there to misunderstand. This is why telling these people to simply open up, to just communicate, to be more vulnerable, lands with such hollow frustration. It is not that they do not want connection. It is that they have a deeply wired, physiologically rooted understanding that not every space is safe for their truth. And they have become very, very good at reading which spaces those are. There is something else worth examining here, something that sits at the intersection of psychology and philosophy, and it is the concept of the internal locus of evaluation. In humanistic psychology, particularly in the tradition of Carl Rogers, this phrase describes the degree to which a person judges the value of their own experience, their own choices, their own truth, from within themselves rather than in constant reference to the reactions of others. Most people operate primarily from an external locus of evaluation. Their sense of whether they made the right decision, whether they are a good person, whether their feelings are legitimate, is continuously calibrated against the feedback they receive from the world around them. They explain themselves because they need the other person's response to confirm that their inner experience is real and valid. The person who goes silent has, often without any formal training in psychology or philosophy, arrived at a different relationship with their own interiority. Through the necessity of self-sufficiency, through years of processing alone, they have developed a capacity to evaluate their own experience from the inside. They know why they did what they did, they know the full context, they know the intention behind the action, and at a certain point they reached a quiet, unsentimental conclusion. The conclusion that a thorough explanation does not guarantee understanding, and that their knowing is enough. This is not arrogance. Let that land clearly. This is not a superiority complex dressed up in philosophical language. This is a person who has simply stopped outsourcing their self-knowledge to people who have demonstrated they cannot hold it carefully. And yet... And this is important, because the story does not end with that adaptation being entirely cost-free. There is a loneliness that can live inside the silence, even when the silence itself feels necessary. There is a grief that sometimes visits in the quiet hours, a grief for the version of connection that might have been possible in a different kind of world, with a different kind of history. The person who goes silent is not without longing. They are simply very practiced at keeping their longing company without making it into a performance. We should be precise here about the distinction between two words that are often used interchangeably, but describe entirely different experiences. Loneliness is the absence of connection. It is the ache of wanting to be known and not being known. It is a feeling that something necessary is missing, and that the missing thing is outside of you, held by other people who are not offering it. Solitude is something else entirely. Solitude is not the absence of connection. It is the presence of peace. It is the experience of being alone without the ache. It is the interior world, not as a waiting room for when real life begins, but as a destination in itself, a place of genuine rest, reflection, and creative aliveness. The person who has learned to go silent is in many cases not suffering from loneliness. They are inhabiting solitude. They have built something inside themselves that genuinely sustains them, a rich and complex interior life, a capacity for self-reflection that most people never develop because they never had to, a relationship with their own mind that is, in its way, profoundly intimate. This is the paradox that the world consistently misreads. It looks from the outside like withdrawal. It looks like loneliness, like damage, like an inability to connect. But from the inside, it is often the most honest and nourishing relationship available. The question worth sitting with now is not, why are you like this? That question, though understandable, keeps you in the position of the patient examining the symptom. The more useful question, the question that opens rather than closes, is how do you live wisely with what you have built? How do you honor the intelligence of your adaptation while also remaining genuinely open to the connections that are actually safe, that are actually reciprocal, that are actually worth the vulnerability? Because here is what can happen over time, and it is worth naming honestly. The protective silence, which began as a precise and intelligent response to a specific kind of environment, can calcify. It can become less a considered choice and more an automatic reflex. The nervous system, having learned that silence protects, can begin to apply that protection indiscriminately, shutting down not only in the environments that actually require protection, but in the moments where genuine connection is available and the risk of being known is actually low. The wall that was built for survival can begin to keep out things that would not have hurt you. This is not a flaw in your character. It is simply the nature of deeply learned patterns. They do not come with fine print that says, apply only when appropriate. They apply when they are triggered, and learning to recognize the trigger, to pause in the moment between stimulus and response, and to ask, is this a place that actually requires my silence, or is this a place where I might be safe enough to be known? That is the work. That is the quiet, ongoing, deeply personal work of the person who has survived by going inward. There will be people in your life who will not understand your silence. They will read it as coldness, or as passive aggression, or as indifference. They will push you to explain yourself, and when you do not, they will construct their own explanations, explanations that say more about their own fears than about your truth, and you will feel in those moments the familiar pull of the old adaptation. The urge to simply let them be wrong, to accept the misunderstanding as the price of your peace. Sometimes that is the right choice. Some misunderstandings are not worth the energy of correction. Some people are not capable of holding your truth carefully, and that is not a moral failing on their part. It is simply a limitation of their current capacity. And you, who have been reading people's capacities since you were very small, already know the difference. But sometimes the silence is costing you something real. Sometimes the person on the other side of the silence is someone who actually could understand if you gave them the words, someone who would hold them carefully. And the silence in those moments is not protection, it is habit. It is the nervous system running an old program in a new situation that does not require it. The invitation, and it is always an invitation and never a demand, is to begin to notice the difference, not to abandon the silence entirely, because your silence is also a form of strength, a form of dignity, a refusal to perform vulnerability for people who would only use it carelessly. But to stay curious about the moments when the silence might be a door you are closing on something that could actually nourish you. You have spent a very long time being the person who does not need anything. The person who manages, who handles, who absorbs. The person who is always fine because there has never been permission to be anything else. The person whose needs became so deeply submerged that you sometimes struggle to locate them yourself. And the world has rewarded you for this. It has called you strong and capable and together. It has relied on you without pausing to ask what it costs you to be relied upon. Here is what I want you to hear. In this quiet moment, in whatever space you are in right now, your worth is not a function of your usefulness. Your value is not measured by how much you can carry or how little you require. The strength that you developed in the silence, the capacity for deep reflection, the highly calibrated reading of other people, the self-sufficiency, the refusal to waste your truth on people who cannot receive it. Those are real. Those are genuinely remarkable qualities. But they are expressions of who you are. They are not the price of admission for your own belonging. You do not owe anyone an explanation for the choices that kept you whole. You do not owe anyone a performance of openness that costs you your peace. And you do not owe the world a version of yourself that is endlessly available, endlessly patient, endlessly willing to shrink your interior life to fit into the available space. What you do deserve, and this is the thing that can be hardest to receive when you have spent so long being the one who gives, is the experience of being known, truly known, not for your competence or your reliability or your composure, but for the full and complex interior world that lives beneath the silence. The one that has been thinking carefully, feeling deeply, and keeping its own counsel for a very long time. That world is not broken. It never was. It was a child who did something extraordinary, who built an entire inner life to survive a situation that did not offer enough room for their full humanity, and who carried that life forward into adulthood with a quiet dignity that most people will never fully see or understand. But you see it, and maybe that has always been enough.